So, who am I? This is my little timeline that I made to introduce myself. I started out life with only one identity, and that was as an artist. And I realized I should put, you can see these little circuitous routes between, but really it was quite circuitous. It was more like a little crisis. I should have put the first little dip here as a crash, because the transition between artist and engineer was really painful. Oh, okay, people are not seeing the whole screen. Better? Okay, I got a yes on the better. Okay, so you can maximize, but I can't. If I do it, that's the same thing that happened with Simon. Okay, good to know. So yeah, the transition between artist and engineer was probably my first crisis in life, and it triggered a long sort of college and career. As a software engineer, I worked for the Applied Physics Lab. I worked for the Human Genome Database, Genome Database, and I was a rapid prototyper, a user interface designer. And then I left software. I had a bit of another crisis. Apparently, they happen a lot in my life, and I spent probably, almost 10 years as a slacker. I went back to grad school to study learning, and a bit of a side thing that happened in grad school was I got really into group learning and teams and collaboration, and that just became my focus. I thought I wanted to learn neuroscience and what the neural mechanisms of learning were, and I did. I took coursework and all that, but it was really where teams and team learning was happening that captured my attention. And I ended up staying at Harvard, where I went, the Graduate School of Education. And I ended up staying there for another 7 years at the Learning Innovations Lab, which was just an amazing experience because I became an animator there. And I used animation as a sense-making tool. And these are just some of the topics that we dug into at the Learning Innovations Lab. This was a consortium of chief learning officers. And it's where I came across things like Cynefin and not Wardley mapping. I learned of Wardley mapping from the Cynefin community, but it's where I learned a lot of my sense-making tools. Oops, sorry about that. You guys were having some Miro. I'm going to exit this play and just use my normal mode of presentation is an iPad, and this does not work well on Hopin. Okay, so the animation that I was doing for the sense making for the chief learning officers, investigating all these really great topics, led me to be what I call a research artist. And the thing that I research is how human systems learn and evolve and what we can do to help. So it's no surprise that Wardley mapping landed well with me. This was sort of the collection of tools I amassed in the process. Cynefin is sort of up here in the frameworks, Wardley mapping, polarity mapping, Otto Scharmer's theory U, Keegan and Leahy's theory of adult development. This was my sort of like trying to make sense of all the theories, models, tools, frameworks, and really resonant stories that I had come across. And for this presentation, I just decided I needed to narrow this down. Because it's too many. So I just picked the ones that fit in what I call my Swiss Army knife of sense-making tools. And they're tools for making thinking visible, They're tools for making sense of messy situations, which I'm very adept at because I've had many crises in my life where everything collapsed. And then tools for designing the future, which I'm also pretty skilled at since I was trained as an engineer. But what's funny is that my training as an engineer did not prepare me for making sense of shit at all. Like when I say that, I mean the shit hitting the fan, pardon my language. So this is sort of the tool set. I'm not going to go in deep here, but one of the things I am going to go in deep on is the case for the Swiss Army knife is the Innovators Compass. And this is a tool that a gal who was an industrial designer at IDEO, which is a global design firm I'm sure many of you have heard of. She came up with this tool because she saw a meta pattern that seemed to fit in her mind all the other design tools that her teams had been using for her whole career. And I'm seeing someone say that their screen is very tiny. I hope that went okay, that someone fixed that on their side. As someone pointed out, you can double click it on your end and it should make it larger. So I have been trying to Wardley map stuff for a while, and I do map on occasion. I have a much harder time mapping with groups because there seems to be a lot of resistance to folks who aren't used to thinking out loud or making thinking visible. Groups that are more comfortable with taking text minutes and making motions, Robert's rules of order, like boards of directors and committees. So I've gotten a lot more leverage with the Innovators Compass in easing people into this. And I've also found for me that I can situate Wardley mapping in a compass. So, oh yeah, this was just real quick on strategy. I was never a strategy person, by the way. I came to strategy because I came to Wardley's keynotes online, and he just makes such a compelling argument for strategy. I mean, how could you not want to do strategy once you hear his description of it? It's just like, whoa, we all should be doing strategy all the time. We should be mapping. And otherwise, how do we get where we want to go? Or how do we know what move to make? Or how do we know whether to make this move rather than that move? So that's how I got into it. And I have come to see strategy, like the strategy cycle. That's the part that really grabbed me. I see that as an integrative, reflective practice that individuals and groups can do. And it's really a really powerful thing, that strategy cycle, for me, for getting people on the same page of what do we mean by strategy. So one of the things I've noticed with groups is that, we schedule a strategy session, and these aren't groups that I'm hired to consult with. These are groups I'm part of. And people are saying, we've been working for years, but should we work on a strategy? And I just zero in on that. I'm like, yeah, let's. But before we ever get to mapping, we can't even agree on the big why. Like, why are we doing this? And to give you some context, these are very big issues. The groups that I'm working with, for instance, are looking at, we're a Quaker meeting. We're very white. How do we get to be more diverse? Or we're a church in an inner city neighborhood that has very few members. How do we keep existing? How do we not croak? Another why, I'm on a board of a nonprofit that is trying to end the prolonged use of solitary confinement in prisons. It's a big why, but in terms of articulating it in a way for action, we spend a lot of time getting on the same page with that. So the first part of the strategy cycle is no small feat. So I've already mentioned that for groups that aren't used to playing in these spaces of making thinking visible, Wardley mapping is a hard place to start. So I'm gonna give us a real quick blast through the Innovators Compass to see how I use it and how I situate Wardley mapping inside it. And I can situate any tool I've got, and any design thinking tool I can situate inside the compass. And this is what Ella Ben-Ur, the creator of the compass, shared with me. And I found so powerful, especially as how it helps me frame these different tools. So I'm going to just go through it as a series of questions. The first question, who is involved? This might be Wardley's users. What's happening now? This is really mapping the landscape of details and what we can observe and notice and put out on a page about our situation. In Wardley land, this would be landscapes and everything that you could put on a map. Next question would be, what futures can we imagine? And this can be really pie in the sky. This is the purpose that would be at the top of the Wardley strategy cycle. And then finally, what big patterns are afoot and what matters most? And this would be doctrine primarily, but also I think of climate. I know Simon situates climate often in more of an observation, but I think of climate as more big patterns. So I tend to put it up here just to give you some, oh, last question. I'll go back to that. What's something we can try now or try next? So this would be the move. What's a move we could make? So here's the compass with some additional axes added to help orient you. So the way Ella organizes this meta tool is people are in the middle. The horizontal axis is time, past and present on the left, future on the right, details on the bottom, big picture on the top. And you can see where I've put kind of aspects of the strategy cycle on the compass in orange. So this is just a version of that compass if one were to fill it out. And as I said, I situate mapping down here in the past and present details section of the Innovators Compass, because these are things that we can discuss and triangulate on, and I can place something here and you can say, well, I don't know if it goes there, or there's something in between these two practices. Obviously, I'm assuming that a lot of knowledge here on Wardley mapping, and I apologize. I hope people were able to see the keynote, because this might not make sense otherwise. So just another picture of Wardley mapping. So at this point, I want to open up. This is my big puzzle. I mean, this is, if we were to map right now, which I would love to do, and we can do this by people sharing their screen. I figure, why have BarCamp if we're not going to map together, frankly? But for me, the big puzzle is, what are the thinking moves that enable actions to be strategic, that enable groups to map, frankly? And I have some thoughts here, like on like the questions about where are we going? Do people feel psychologically safe? That might be a core thinking move. I don't know if that's so much a move, but a state, an internal situational awareness. Does it feel safe for me right now to share what I think about where we're going, or what I think about where we are, and not run the risk of having the group be frustrated with me. Like, wait, really? Are you implying that we're not where we think we are, or we're not going where we think we're going? And I have this other thought here on the top right that says, what means are we willing to use? And this is really, I think, an important discussion that doesn't fit so well if all we are doing is mapping, but this idea of, can we talk about doctrine? And I encounter this a lot. Just real quick, the example that's most salient for me is this group that I'm on. It's a nonprofit working to end or at least reduce solitary confinement. It's an interfaith group. So we have an executive director that's a Jewish rabbi. We have many Jewish members. We have Quakers. We have Baptists. We have Christians of all stripes. And we do not have any Muslims on the board, which would be a real great diversification of thought thing to have. But the thing I notice is we don't have discussions about doctrine, and our doctrine in use is a combative one. We're gonna get correctional officers and correctional administrators and legislators. We're going to get them. We're going to win. We're going to go to battle with them, and we're going to win. And I don't really see that as a viable approach. So I bring that up because I think that these discussions about doctrine are critical, and I've not yet had a good way to externalize those. There's not a lot of good, right now, the place that they fit in to my frameworks, they don't really fit in. I'm zooming way out here for a sec. Where they fit in to a compass is in the top left, big picture, what matters most. It's not clear to me that I feel like there should be better tools for helping us make sense of doctrine and what we're willing to use. And that's another thing I'm really interested in exploring in this space. But Simon's doctrine, of course, are very geared corporate America and structure. And so some of them are helpful, like transparency, some not so helpful in terms of how I can translate them. So I'd love help in that space too. So I'm going to stop talking and hope that I can have some folks join in the conversation here, and perhaps we can do some mapping on learning to map. Kind of what are the moves for mappers to get comfortable with, and what are the value chains there? What are the dependencies? How do we support folks in learning? And one thing I'm going to say about this is I've mapped this internal space of learners a lot. And one thing I find is that over here on the bottom right, there might be a lot of really stable, invisible patterns of behavior and thought. I'm going to say thought right now, that are going to be, it requires some unlearning to make moves in a way that open people to learning and mapping. They need to at least suspend a very stable, active pattern of thought and behavior, or a set of stable patterns of thought and behavior, before they can even map, because there are they impede. They're like Simon's inertia blocks that he puts on maps. Okay, so who wants to join me here and in a discussion?